It was just past 8:30 p.m. when Liana first noticed the subtle change in the air. The living room felt smaller, quieter, as though the walls themselves had leaned in closer. She had been folding laundry, humming softly to herself, when the doorbell rang. A chill ran down her spine, not from fear, but from an unfamiliar anticipation she couldn't name. Her husband, Daniel, answered the door with his usual easy charm, but she stayed by the kitchen counter, watching. The man who stepped in was tall, calm, and entirely composed, yet his presence seemed to pull the room into sharper focus. Liana had seen him only once before, in a blurred photograph tucked into Daniel's office desk. Now, standing in their softly lit hallway, he looked more like a quiet storm than a guest. "Liana," Daniel said, a note of formality in his voice that she hadn't heard in years, "this is Mr. Cassian. He's from work." The man's lips curved into a minimal, polite smile. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." His voice was soft, each word deliberate. Liana's mind struggled to keep pace. There was something about the way he spoke that made her chest tighten slightly, a kind of gentle gravity pulling at her attention without a hint of threat. She nodded, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. There was an almost imperceptible pause, and the quiet felt thicker than the shadows creeping across the walls. Daniel noticed it, too, his brow furrowing just a little as if he could sense the tension between the air and the room. "You've just caught us at dinner prep," Liana said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "Please, come in." Cassian moved slowly, deliberately, as if every step mattered more than it should. He glanced around, his gaze soft yet absorbing, noting the framed photos, the small potted plants lined along the windowsill. Liana felt her own heartbeat in sync with his movements, a rhythm she hadn't expected. "Thank you," he murmured, his eyes briefly meeting hers. That single look felt charged, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that made her aware of every detail, the way the evening light fell across his face, the slight tilt of his head, the quiet steadiness of his voice. Daniel cleared his throat. "I thought we could finish the reports after dinner. It won't take long." His hand rested lightly on Liana's shoulder, grounding her in the familiar warmth of their partnership. Still, she couldn't shake the strange sensation of the room shifting subtly around her. Dinner passed in a careful, measured rhythm. Cassian's presence was quiet but deliberate, punctuating the conversation with thoughtful observations rather than intrusion. Liana found herself listening more than speaking, noticing the way Daniel's hand brushed hers, reassuring her, and how even the smallest gestures of the guest carried weight. After dessert, Cassian stood, moving toward the living room. "I hope I'm not imposing," he said softly. "I prefer to keep things light at home." "You're welcome," Liana replied automatically, though her mind was racing. She could not have anticipated how someone's quiet confidence could make her so aware of every movement, every glance, without saying much at all. Daniel leaned closer to her as they escorted him toward the door. "Different, isn't he?" he whispered. Liana nodded, struggling to articulate the sensation. It was not fear, not anxiety, it was something subtler, a pull she didn't understand. Cassian paused at the door, turning back toward her. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said, and for a moment, Liana felt the space between them thrum, a tension that was soft yet undeniable. Then he left, the front door clicking shut behind him. Liana exhaled, the sound heavier than she realized. Daniel stayed beside her, hand brushing hers in that familiar, grounding warmth. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I think, yes," she murmured, though the truth was uncertain. The house felt different now, the shadows deeper, the air denser. She couldn't explain why, but she knew the evening had left an impression that would linger far longer than a single visit. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. The rest of the night stretched quietly, but Liana could not shake the feeling that something in their home had shifted, subtly, irrevocably, while they had been distracted by pleasantries and polite conversation. She went to bed with her thoughts restless, imagining the quiet weight of someone's gaze lingering in the corners of the living room, where nothing had changed yet everything felt different. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, but it did little to chase away the memory of last night. Liana stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, yet her mind was elsewhere. The soft tone of Cassion's voice kept replaying in her thoughts, curling around the edges of her awareness like a quiet echo she couldn't shake. Daniel entered the kitchen, dressed in his usual work clothes. He smiled at her, a warmth that usually anchored her, but even that familiarity felt oddly distant. "Coffee?" he asked, holding up the pot. "Yes, please," she replied, her hands trembling slightly as she dried the last dish. She forced a small smile, but inside, the memory of the evening before tugged at her chest. Cassian hadn't said much, yet his presence had pressed against the air, leaving it taut in a way she couldn't explain. Breakfast passed in careful rhythm. Daniel talked about mundane office details, his voice cheerful but tinged with subtle caution. Liana nodded along, though her attention kept drifting. She found herself picturing Cassion's quiet movements, the way he had observed their home as if cataloguing each detail. It was harmless, she told herself, yet the memory made her stomach flutter. Later, as Daniel settled into his home office, Liana wandered to the living room. She touched the edge of the couch where Cassian had sat, feeling the faint trace of a memory that wasn't her own. Shadows danced across the floor in the morning sun, and she realized with a start how aware she had become of every small corner of their home. Even the familiar felt unsettled now, as if the presence of a visitor could stretch beyond the hours they had been here. A soft knock at the window startled her. She looked outside and saw nothing unusual, just the garden bathed in golden light. But her heart still raced. She shook her head and laughed quietly at herself, realizing she was already imagining echoes of last night. The day passed slowly, each hour stretching longer than it should. Liana tried to focus on her usual tasks, laundry, light cleaning, a few calls to her sister, but her mind kept returning to Cassion's visit. She remembered the way Daniel had subtly tensed, the way his hand had brushed hers when Cassian had spoken softly to them both. Something unspoken had passed between them, a quiet shift in the ordinary rhythm of their lives. Evenings were usually their time together, filled with easy conversation and familiar laughter. But this evening felt different. Liana noticed Daniel's glances at the clock, subtle and fleeting, as though he were tracking time for a reason he hadn't shared. When they sat down to dinner, the quiet seemed more pronounced, stretched thin between their usual chatter. After clearing the dishes, Liana found herself pacing. The thought of Cassion's visit made the room feel smaller again, shadows curling around her like soft fingers. Daniel came in, noticing her restlessness. "You're still thinking about him," he said gently. "I can't help it," she admitted. "It's just, he has this way about him. Quiet, but heavy. Like he leaves a trace without touching anything." Daniel leaned against the doorway, rubbing his forehead. "I noticed. I don't think he means anything by it. His, careful, deliberate. That's all. But yes, I felt it too." Her chest tightened, a mix of relief and unease. She wanted to dismiss it, to tell herself she was overreacting, but the memory lingered, pressing gently, insistently. She realized she had been naive to think a single evening with a quiet presence wouldn't leave its mark. Later, as she read a book on the couch, Liana sensed movement in the hallway behind her. She turned instinctively, half expecting to see Cassion's familiar form, though she knew he wasn't there. The air had shifted again, subtle yet undeniable. She hugged the book closer, heart fluttering, aware that something unspoken had started to thread itself into their daily lives. Night came, thick and heavy, with shadows pooling in the corners of the room. Liana lay awake beside Daniel, staring at the ceiling. The memory of last night's quiet tension hummed in her mind. She wondered if Daniel felt it too, or if it was simply hers alone to bear. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Somewhere far away, a clock chimed softly, marking the passage of hours. Liana felt a mix of anticipation and unease, knowing that the subtle disturbance of one evening had shifted something delicate in their home. And as sleep threatened to pull her under, she couldn't shake the thought that the quiet presence of one visitor might echo far longer than she was ready to face. The following morning, Liana awoke to the sound of birds outside the window, yet the sunlight felt strangely filtered, as though it were passing through an invisible veil. She stretched lazily but found her thoughts immediately drifting back to the night before, to Cassion's quiet words and the soft authority that seemed to linger in the spaces he had occupied. Daniel was already in the kitchen when she joined him, pouring orange juice into 2 glasses. "Good morning," he said, his smile steady but reserved, as if he were gauging her mood. Liana returned the greeting, though she realized she hadn't felt fully awake since Cashin's visit. The air around them felt subtly altered, and she didn't know if it was only in her perception. Breakfast was quiet. Daniel glanced toward the window more than usual, and Liana found herself studying his profile, noticing the slight furrow of concern between his brows. They both spoke politely, but the rhythm of their usual easy conversation had shifted. Even mundane exchanges felt threaded with a tension neither addressed aloud. Later, while tidying the living room, Liana caught herself noticing details she hadn't before: the way the cushions pressed down where Cassian had sat, the faint impression of his steps along the hardwood floor. Each memory was like a soft echo, pressing gently against her senses, making her aware of a space that now felt both lived in and subtly unfamiliar. She decided to step outside into the garden to clear her mind. The cool morning air brushed against her face, and she inhaled deeply, hoping to let it wash away the lingering weight of the previous evening. But the world beyond the house seemed sharper now, more defined, almost as though it too had felt Cashin's quiet presence. Daniel joined her after a while, leaning against the railing. "I can't stop thinking about how different it felt with him here," Liana admitted. "It's not discomfort. It's something else. A tension I can't name." He nodded slowly, a faraway look in his eyes. "I felt it too. It's subtle. Hard to explain." He speaks softly, but it's like his calm fills the room in a way that changes the air itself. Liana looked at him, feeling the familiarity of his presence and yet noticing a shared uncertainty she hadn't seen before. They walked through the garden in silence, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound. Even among the flowers and sunlight, the memory of last night pressed against her awareness, a quiet weight she couldn't shake. By afternoon, she found herself rearranging the living room again, moving chairs and cushions in a subconscious attempt to reclaim the space. It was pointless. She realized that no physical change could undo the subtle imprint of Cashin's visit. The way he had spoken, the deliberate calm, it had left a trace far deeper than furniture could ever bear. When Daniel returned home later that evening, he seemed quieter than usual. Liana watched him as he carried his briefcase, noting the careful deliberation in his movements. He kissed her on the forehead with familiar warmth, yet she sensed that even he felt the echo of last night. Dinner passed with measured conversation. Liana noticed Daniel's eyes occasionally flick toward the doorway, a subtle alertness in his posture. She felt a similar vigilance in herself, a sense that the house had changed in small, imperceptible ways, and that the calm presence of one man could leave ripples in the most ordinary of nights. After clearing the table, Liana settled on the couch with a cup of tea, letting the steam curl around her face. The memory of Cashin's soft-spoken words lingered, the echo of a presence that had touched her home and her mind without effort. It was strange and unsettling, yet there was a peculiar curiosity to it too, a fascination she could not name. Daniel appeared in the doorway, pausing for a moment. "Do you think it's just us?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above the hum of the refrigerator. "Or does his presence actually change the air in a room?" Liana sipped her tea, considering his question. "I think, maybe it does. Some people leave traces without realizing it. It's not just memory. It's the way we feel, the way we notice things." He shifted something. A long silence stretched between them, comfortable yet tinged with the same quiet tension that had started the night of Cashin's visit. Liana rested her hand over Daniel's, and they both felt the familiar warmth, but it was now accompanied by a shared awareness that their ordinary life had subtly changed. As the evening drew to a close, shadows pooled in the corners of the living room. Liana felt them press gently, like the soft weight of anticipation. She hugged a pillow to her chest, realizing that the quiet presence of one visitor could stretch beyond his time here, threading itself into the rhythm of their lives. And as she glanced toward the hallway, she couldn't shake the sense that the house was listening, waiting, responding to something neither she nor Daniel fully understood. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains in gentle streaks, painting the living room in soft gold. Liana stretched and took a deep breath, but the calm she had hoped for remained elusive. The house felt charged in a way that was impossible to explain, like the air itself remembered Cashin's presence and refused to forget. Daniel was already at the kitchen counter, reading the newspaper, his brow slightly furrowed. "Morning," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of thoughtfulness. Liana smiled, but the gesture felt automatic. She knew he was feeling the same subtle shift she was, though neither of them had spoken about it since yesterday. She poured herself a cup of coffee, feeling the warmth seep into her hands. Every movement, from lifting the mug to taking a sip, seemed heightened in awareness. The faintest sound, dishwasher hum, the breeze rattling a window echoed through her senses as though the house itself were alert. "Do you think we're overthinking this?" Daniel asked suddenly, placing his newspaper aside. He leaned on the counter, watching her. "I mean, it was one evening, right? Just a guest." Liana shook her head, her fingers tightening around the mug. "It's not just that. It's the way he was, present without being loud, without demanding attention. And yet, the room itself seemed to notice him. I can't explain it, but I feel it." He nodded slowly, and for a moment, they shared a quiet understanding, an unspoken acknowledgement of the invisible weight Cassian had left behind. It was strange, even unsettling, yet not unpleasant. A gentle curiosity had woven itself into their days, threading through routine moments, unnoticed yet undeniable. The morning passed with subtle tension threading through ordinary chores. Liana found herself pausing more than usual, noticing the light reflecting off the hardwood floor, the way shadows shifted with each movement. Her thoughts wandered endlessly back to last night, to Cassian's deliberate calm and the quiet authority that seemed to ripple from him without effort. By afternoon, she decided to step outside into the garden, hoping fresh air would anchor her thoughts. The flowers were in full bloom, their colors bright under the sun, but even the vivid blooms couldn't pull her attention away from the lingering sense of observation. Every small rustle of leaves made her pause, imagining a shadow in the corner of her vision. Daniel joined her eventually, carrying a cup of tea. They walked slowly along the stone path, side by side, their footsteps synchronized. Silence between them was comfortable yet threaded with the same tension that had begun with Cassian's visit. Liana felt as if their home, their life, had acquired an additional layer, a subtle current she couldn't name but felt in every heartbeat. When evening arrived, Liana lit a few candles, hoping the soft glow would restore a sense of normalcy. Daniel sat close on the couch, handing her a blanket. They sipped tea quietly, sharing warmth without words. But the memory of Cassian's presence hovered, gentle yet insistent, like a whisper brushing against the edges of their lives. "I keep thinking about the way he spoke," Liana said softly, almost to herself. Not the words, but the way he moved through the room. It was quiet, deliberate, and somehow heavy. Daniel nodded, his hand brushing hers. "I noticed it too. It's like he left an impression that isn't visible but is somehow felt." Her chest tightened, a mix of unease and fascination. She realized this presence had shifted something in her perception of space itself. Every corner of their home, every familiar object, seemed newly observed, newly alive. She could almost sense the calm echo of Cassian's movements lingering in the corners, in the faint drafts that passed through open windows. Nightfall brought with it a quiet tension, different from any she had known before. Shadows pooled in soft corners of the living room, and Liana hugged a cushion to her chest. The memory of last night's dinner, of Cassian's soft voice and the deliberate calm he carried, made her aware of every small sound. Even as Daniel slept beside her later, she could not shake the sensation that the house itself had changed. Something subtle, something unspoken, had settled into the rhythm of their lives. And as she listened to the night around her, Liana realized that the gentle presence of one person could ripple far beyond a single visit, lingering in the quiet, threading itself into every corner of a home, and perhaps every corner of her heart. The next morning, Liana woke with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in days. The sun poured through the windows, warm and steady, and the house felt ordinary again. Not because Cassian's visit had been erased, but because she and Daniel had adjusted to the subtle currents he had left behind. Daniel was already in the kitchen, humming softly as he prepared breakfast. Liana watched him for a moment, noting the ease in his movements, the quiet rhythm that matched the familiar beat of her own heart. She realized that whatever tension had lingered after the visit had transformed into awareness, a sharper perception of each other, and of the life they shared. "Morning," Daniel said, his voice carrying that warm, grounding tone she loved. Liana smiled, feeling a swell of affection she hadn't realized had deepened over the past few days. "Morning," she replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee. The aroma filled the room, comforting and familiar. For the first time in several days, she felt entirely present, anchored in the moment rather than caught in the echoes of a visitor's subtle influence. They ate breakfast slowly, speaking in the familiar cadence of shared life. Daniel recounted a minor incident at work, his words light, but Liana noticed his gestures were more attentive, deliberate, as if the quiet awareness they had both carried had sharpened his perception. She laughed at one of his stories, and the sound felt genuine, unforced, a small celebration of returning to themselves. Afterward, Liana tidied the living room. Each cushion returned to its usual place, every object aligned as it had been. Yet, as she straightened the small vase on the shelf, she realized she no longer felt a shadow pressing against her thoughts. Cashin's presence, once heavy in its quiet weight, had become a memory rather than a tension. It had passed through, leaving behind a subtle trace of awareness and care, but no longer holding sway over the rhythm of her days. Daniel joined her with a cup of tea, standing close without crowding. "Feeling better?" he asked softly. "Yes," she said, letting out a deep breath. "I think I finally understand. It wasn't that his visit changed us, exactly. It was that it made us notice how fragile and beautiful the quiet moments can be. How easily the air around us can shift, even without intention." He smiled, his eyes warm and steady. "And we noticed it together," he said. "That's what matters." Liana leaned against him, feeling the gentle pressure of their shared closeness. The house was quiet, the sunlight soft on the floors, and for the first time in days, the space felt completely theirs again. Not because nothing had changed, but because they had learned to inhabit it with new attention, with care for each other and for the small, often unnoticed currents that shaped their life. Later, as they settled in the living room to read, Liana felt a deep sense of calm. She thought of Cashin's visit not with unease but with a quiet acknowledgement. It had been a momentary disturbance, yes, but one that revealed the strength of their bond, the warmth of shared understanding, and the beauty of quiet presence. As the evening drew close, shadows shifted gently across the room, and Liana let herself watch them with a soft smile. The house no longer felt like a stage for subtle tension but a living space shaped by awareness, love, and shared rhythm. She realized that moments of quiet influence, though unsettling at first, could deepen one's connection to home and heart alike. Daniel kissed her forehead, and she leaned into him, their hands entwined. The memory of last night's unease was gone, replaced by something steadier, the knowledge that life's subtle shifts, even when mysterious, could bring them closer rather than pull them apart. The night outside was calm, the stars blinking softly against the dark canvas of the sky. Inside, the living room held its usual warmth, filled with the quiet presence of two people fully aware of each other, and fully at peace. Liana closed her eyes, savoring the gentle rhythm of their life. The subtle currents had passed, leaving behind clarity, intimacy, and a quiet understanding that even the softest voice could leave a lasting impression, one that transformed not the space, but the hearts within it. The house was finally still, the air clear, and for the first time in days, Liana felt the perfect balance of peace and presence, knowing that the night's quiet disturbances had led them to a deeper connection than they could have imagined.